You are listening to Verb a Minute, where words do remain.
Welcome to the new episode of Right the Wrongs. Every Wednesday and Saturday, Right the Wrongs raises the public awareness on pressing human rights abuse and creates an incubator of activism. I'm Kaya.
And I'm Isis.
And we are your hosts for today. This episode is the last of a three-part series in which we discuss the topic of pornography. In this episode, we'll focus on how pornography influences the image of women in our society.
Just before we begin the episode, we just have a few disclaimers. The first one being that most of the studies we have found are contradictory. Either it is because the field is not very explored, or also because different studies support different angles and thus differ in points of view. Most of these studies also have a Western focus, so that may be the reason why we lack in diversity. And since pornography comes in many formats, its effects may vary on the type of media that is consumed.
So let's start with our topic and with discussing how the age when we start to consume pornographic materials, how it influences our behavior. So generally, the younger you start, the more damaging the influence of pornographic materials can be. And generally we focus here on men and boys. So when they begin to watch porn at a younger age, they can start to accept this model of behavior where men have power over women. And when they start at an older age, they're more likely to accept this model of behavior of a so-called playboy. And that is because if you start at a younger age, you start to expect real life to look like a pornographic video, which is simply not true, and that leads to disappointments. And because of that, men or young adults, they start to think that the only way they can have a relationship with women is to be dominant over her, to have power over her. However, when an older person starts to watch porn, they are more confident in their own experiences and in their own performance. And that is why they start to accept this behavior of like a single man having more women and having several women interested in him.
Although all this data doesn't prove exactly causation, because there could definitely be other variables to take into account. For example, having very strong gender roles in your own family will also influence the expectation that you have of relationships.
Exactly. So now let's move on to this degrading image of women that pornographic industry unfortunately very often perpetuates. Porn can be very harmful to the society, of course not always, and this is a bit of a generalizing statement, but there is this possibility of a harmful influence. It can take two forms. So first of all, it shows women as the weaker gender, as this submissive gender that's always under the power of man. And secondly, there's this sexual imagery of women existing for men's pleasure. Because the pornographic industry, it is produced by men and it is catered for men. So women's bodies are started to be seen as objects for male pleasure.
And it's also dictating women how they should be acting when they have sexual relationships with men. They internalize that they should be submissive and that they're going to mimic what they think, what is right, and what they think what men want and expect of relationships. And it's just going to further perpetuate these gender roles and performances.
Yeah, and it's not only about individuals, it's this whole cultural phenomenon, which is called the pornification of culture, where certain tropes and narratives, they become embedded in popular texts, and we don't even notice that because this particular kinds of sexuality, they're so very much normalized. And that also results in the hypersexualization of women and of girls, and the commodification of those images for a global market.
Exactly, and it has been theorized that pornography is the material means of sexualizing inequality, which is why pornography would hold a central practice in the subordination of women, and that it reproduces this hierarchical power of men over women.
Yeah, and these studies, they have argued that this influence is so strong that it also affects lesbian and gay relationships, where even though both partners are of the same gender, it is expected to work in such a way that one party plays this more submissive, passive role, and the other more dominant role.
And about the topic of objectification, feminist scholar Catherine McKinnon asserts that pornography tends to objectify women, exploit their sexuality for men's pleasure, and portray sex roles in which women are inferior, violated, or subject to physical abuse. And coming back on the pornification of culture, for example, in magazines, for both men and women magazines, there are many images, eroticized images of women, viewing them as sexual objects where they're just basically ornamental in advertisements, for example.
Yeah, and this drop off in pornographic videos of women being violated or physically abused it's where like the problems are becoming much worse, because there is one thing, perpetuating gender roles is one thing, but viewing frequently images where women are violated, it has a significant influence on how men behave towards women. And this influence is certainly not positive, because studies have found that it's been related to rape acceptance beliefs, and that it has been correlated with and predictive of actual sexual assault perpetration and domestic violence.
Yeah, and it's also perpetrating the patriarchal structures and attitudes that will influence the relationships existing between sexist attitudes and the endorsement of oppressive beauty ideals and practices.
And the last angle that we want to touch upon in this part about how porn influences this negative image of women, there's also the fact that porn industry is very much racist. And as one scholar said, where white women are depicted in pornography as objects, black women are depicted as animals. And this is unfortunately a very sad truth that black women, they face, or generally women of color, they face there's this intersectionality of oppression of both racial and gendered inequalities. So there's also this angle of this negative influence on the image of women in our society.
So now that we have touched upon how women are viewed and portrayed in the porn industry, what happens after you leave the porn industry? Well, for most women, it's impossible to control your image after you have quit the job, and most of the time, they will not be paid when their image is reused without their consent. And it's very difficult to actually get a hold on this problem. Another point is that the fact that when someone was in the industry, they cannot be considered anything but either a victim of the industry or just someone who was in the industry, and they cannot be considered anything else. So these women who have been portrayed as sexual, sensual, sexy, super dominant in porn material will be treated as victims even after they have left the job, and they're just generally not listened to or just considered as humans.
So as we said from the beginning, the studies concerning pornographic industry and the pornographic materials, they can be very contradictory. And solution for that, or one explanation for that, is that we shouldn't treat men or women, like the whole gender, as a monolith, because obviously it's impossible to find a single statement that fits a whole, half of the world population. So instead of looking at men as a whole group, we should look at certain subgroups, because it is much more possible that porn just exacerbates the traits that already existed in a certain individual. For example, if we talk about this violence towards women, it is much more probable that a certain individual already, they had a pre-existing tendency towards this kind of violence, and viewing pornographic materials just made it stronger than saying that the whole fault for this behavior is in just watching porn.
Yes, and also, so we've talked a lot about how women are very, very negatively affected by the porn industry, but I think we should remember that most people are aware that what they are watching, what they're consuming, is produced essentially for their desires, and that it shows...
What it shows is not real, it's a fantasy.
Exactly, and that people know that this is not exactly what they should expect in relationships, and this is just something that is for pleasure and is not what they should be seeing in society and what they're going to be seeing in society. And if you don't like this portrayals of relationships, especially heterosexual relationships, then what you can do is turn towards feminist porn, which generally draws particular attention on female orgasm and just globally a more natural representation of sexual relationships and healthy behaviors.
That's the end of our episode on pornography. Feel free to engage with us on our social media channels. Do you feel that porn highlights gender roles and the systemic oppression of women? Let us know by following us on Facebook and Instagram, and join us for further discussions on our Telegram group. Or leave us a comment at theverbamanentpodcast@gmail.com. This episode was written by Kaya and Isis, produced by Serena, and brought to you by Right the Wrongs under Verba Manent.
The next episode of Right the Wrongs will talk about refugees in the US. You can find the program wherever you find your podcast, bringing you detailed updates on pressing human rights issues.
Till next time!
Take care!